Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. It's now been a week and a half since the big balance patch, a couple of nerfs and 25 buffs, and this should be enough time that we should start seeing some of the effects of the buffs as well. The nerf effects are typically immediate, and buff effects take a little bit longer to actually be visible. And what can I say? The buff effects, they just haven't really appeared. There are meta changes. The nerfs were actually quite effective. There is a lot of meta diversity at the moment. There are not that many decks that have super great matchups, but there's actually one deck that is clearly ahead of everyone else, and even that one has some specific weaknesses. So it's a diverse meta. You can play pretty much any class. The weakest class at the moment is actually Warrior. Although Menagerie Warrior, Enrage Warrior, they're sort of playable, they are not included in this list. I just wasn't really satisfied with how their progress looked like and how the trend lines looked especially. So this list includes 16 decks, and there are decks for every other class except for Warrior. Overall, I mean, that already, there's 10 classes here, so quite a lot of diversity. The nerfs were successful, the buffs less so. But there are some decks that are newer, although they were kind of discovered in conjunction with the balance patch, not so much because of the balance patch. And compared to the situation like 2.5-3 weeks ago, early days of Festival of Legends, every single deck has changed at least a little bit. There's been evolution within the archetypes everywhere. So let's take a look at what's going on. At number 16 we have Miracle Rogue. Miracle Rogue looks like it is the strongest rogue archetype. Menagerie Rogue looked promising for a while, but it has kind of been left by the wayside by now. Sorry. I mean, you can still play it, it's around 50%, but Miracle Rogue is better if you actually want to climb. And what has Miracle Rogue learned during Festival of Legends? Well, one thing it has learned is that POSIX Audio Engineer belongs in aggressive decks. And yeah, POSIX is really shining in Miracle Rogue as well. And when you face 1/1 tokens, you want Fan of Knives. I guess those are the main lessons for Miracle Rogue, the main adjustments. Other than that, Sinstone Graveyards, Queen Azara's, Krakatoas, the usual. And at number 15 we have Mech Mage, and Mech Mage has kind of went backwards in some ways, because Mech Mage is back to the Fireball build. If you remember during Voyage to the Sunken City, Mech Mage used to run Fireballs for some additional reach, and Fireballs are back on the menu, and Mech Mage is kind of okay. It's not great, Mage overall is not great, but Mech Mage is playable. It also makes use of Audio Splitter, which is a buffed card, but that buff is not the reason Mech Mage is played. The slightly stronger mage deck currently is Burn Mage, and the Burn Mage competition ended with Cosmic Keyboard list. This list that has Cosmic Keyboard, so it can pump out some of those elementals, and then it runs Solid Alibi for some extra turns. This proved to be the stronger variant of Burn Mage, and this is what you want to play now if you want to play Burn Mage. There is also a slightly different variant of this list that also runs Vexallus, another legendary card. But Vexallus just doesn't seem very useful. I mean, it's okay in the deck, but it's a pretty niche legendary, so there's no reason to really craft it if you want to play this archetype. One of the most visible effects of the buffs is that Fatigue Imp Warlock is back. Yeah, the Fatigue package was buffed, Crescendo was made cheaper, Crazed Conductor was made cheaper. Both of those cards were already nice in Fatigue Imp Warlock. And okay, Fatigue Imp Warlock was like, hey, yeah, nice, let's ride. Using those cards, also using Hawkstrider Ranchers now, which is a more recent addition. Looks like Fatigue Imp Warlock is somewhat playable. Not great, but something that you can climb with. This list includes Symphony of Sins, but I don't think Symphony of Sins is necessary for this archetype. When it comes to those bigger final win conditions, then Imp King Rafam is the best one, and Darkened Ratir is the second best one. Symphony of Sins, a little bit redundant. But, I mean, if you happen to have it, you can actually play it in this deck, and it can have some fun outcomes. At number 12 we have Mech Paladin. I figured I do need to mention Mech Paladin. Mech Paladin is, I mean, it has gotten some new tools since we last played this in Voyage the Sunken City, because there's Disco Mole of course in this deck, there's Frequency Oscillator in this deck, there's Goldwing in this deck, so there are some slight touches. But overall the archetype still plays mainly like it used to play in Voyage, and Mech Paladin's real big problem is that it's just worse than Pure Paladin. Pure Paladin still employs somewhat similar strategy, although only with Paladin cards, and it's just stronger in every way. So yeah, you can play this if you like the theme, you like the flavor of playing with mechs, but you will always know that there is very similar speed Paladin archetype available that's just better. Druid has been through a lot in this expansion. The hero power core has been used in pretty much every Druid deck. The Free Spirit, the Groovy Cat, the Peaceful Piper, just buffing up your hero power. But then what? What is Druid's win condition? Tony Druid is still around. Tony Druid is like 51% win rate, so yeah, you can play Tony Druid. But it's actually better if you play the deck without Tony. That's kind of weird, but that's how it goes. And currently the strongest variant of this hero power druid is this Ozumat list, which makes use of Ozumat and makes use of explosive sheep, so it has some hard removal that druid usually does not have. Between that hard removal, between the hero power buffs, and then Anubrakan, Undeking, Zok. Just getting a lot of stats on the board with the power of that Anubrakan and all the armor that you gain. And this is a fine deck. The Shaman buffs that we got were directed at Overload Shaman, but Overload Shaman is still miserably bad. I mean, it's so bad that if you try to play it on ladder, you will just feel bad. If you win like 35%, maybe you can even win like 40% of your games nowadays, but it just feels miserable to play. So sorry, I just can't recommend it by any means. But Totem Shaman is Shaman's only currently viable archetype, very, very aggressive. Punishes slower decks like Druid decks really hard because it just comes right at you, but it also has plenty of counters. Alongside Death Knight, Demon Hunter is one of the best classes in the game, and that still applies even after the nerf patch. And Outcast Demon Hunter. Outcast Demon Hunter was the scourge of the ladder on day one. It was very rapidly refined to a large extent, and that allowed it to have a head start into the expansion, just blasting through with that power of tokens and then halve area, and that's even stronger than a Bloodlust, just deals so much damage. There's been some refinement since. The addition of Hawkstrider Rancher, for example. Turns out that Hawkstrider Rancher is just a good card when you summon a bunch of tokens, so yeah, it just gives you ways to stay on the board, stay relevant, and then punish people with that halve area. Really sweet addition to the archetype. And it's still strong, it's not quite as dominant as it used to be, but a powerful deck for climbing nonetheless. And the kind of same applies to Frost Death Knight. Frost Death Knight was hit with multiple nerfs. It was the worst hit of the Death Knight decks, and consequently now it is actually the worst of the Death Knight decks, especially facing the current overall meta. Frost Death Knight is still strong though. It only has a couple of really strong matchups now. It lost a lot of percentage points in many of matchups, but they're still like slightly favored or close to even. We're talking 50-51%, where it used to be like 55%. And it doesn't have a lot of weaknesses still. Spell Demon Hunter, Big Demon Hunter. So Frost Death Knight is still perfectly playable. There's also been some refinement in the list since the nerfs, and especially the addition of Posig. Hey, Posig is just a really, really sweet card. It's also free. It is the free login reward legendary, so what is there not to like? A powerful deck and a pretty cheap one as well. One of the favorite decks at very top legend is Spell Demon Hunter. High legend players tend to like these combo-ish decks where you have a lot of decisions to make, you play a ton of cards. It is a little bit difficult to play, and that's why the lower you go on the ladder, the less I can recommend this deck. It's still a fine deck. Sinful Brand is a powerful card. You risk being killed in so many ways. Sinful Brand and tokens and Lady Steno Abusive Sergeant and buffs and hits, and all sorts of madness can happen when you're up against Spell Demon Hunter. But as I said, it is quite difficult to play, and that's why I don't necessarily recommend this, but it is still a powerful deck. We're also finally seeing the full effects of the Hunt buffs, because the Strangleton Heart buff, making it 8 mana, then making it so that you can actually follow up Faithful Companions with Strangleton Heart. You just have a little bit more speed, and that has meant that the best Hunter deck right now is this kind of hybrid Hunter. HS Replay actually classifies this as a Face Hunter deck, although, I mean, Faithful Companions, Hydralodon, Strangleton Heart, King Crush. Yeah, I guess you could call this a Face Hunter, although I kind of wouldn't. Anyway, it is an aggressive deck, but it has some top end as well, and it makes really nice use of the buff to Strangleton Heart. One of the most talked about decks in the immediate days after the balance patch was Big Demon Hunter, and it does appear that Big Demon Hunter is here to stay. It's not quite the best deck on the ladder now that people have had some time to play against it, maybe tweak their list a little bit and especially tweak their strategies against it a little bit. Now people already know how to counter this deck, but the deck still remains quite hilarious. All Fel breaks loose. If you infuse it by having 3 demons die while it's in your hand, it will resurrect 3 demons. So if you can get some Illidar Inquisitors and Brutal Annihilants to die, and then you resurrect them, and then they just go into taunts and go face, and it's just really beautiful. I really enjoy this archetype. This is a really fun deck to play. And coming at number 4, we have the premium control deck in the format, and the premium control deck in the format is still Blood Death Knight. Blood Death Knight is also the most popular deck on the ladder, and like, what is there not to like? It has a ton of tools, it has answers to all sorts of threats, it has multiple ways to actually also win the game. Just a very powerful, slower deck. But the top 3 decks in the format are not about control, they are about tempo. And first we have at number 3 Undead Priest. Undead Priest, the premium aggressive priest archetype, still going strong. The deck hasn't changed that much since the rotation, although it did get some new tools with Shadow Ascendant. And in the current meta, the Swarm strategy is the strongest one. The Swarming deck is pretty much 28 cards complete. Most lists are trying to find the last 2 slots. In this list, those last 2 slots are taken by 2 copies of Haunting Nightmare. There's also a list with 2 copies of 3-mana Zombie, there's lists with 2 copies of Amalgam of the Deep, but right now, looking at statistics, I prefer the list with the Haunting Nightmares. I actually think this is probably the 30-card Undead Priest list in this expansion. And coming in second is Pure Paladin. Pure Paladin has found some new tools, new tweaks, new life. The Order in the Court variant is back, but it's not coming with the Blood Crusader. Instead, it's coming with Guardian's Grace, Light Ray, Countess, and Anachronos. So Pure Paladin is really making the most out of playing Paladin cards, playing holy spells, just getting some mana cheating going on after Order in the Court and riding that wave all the way to victory. And then there is only one deck left to cover, the best deck in the game at the moment. And the best deck in the game at the moment is Unholy Death Knight. Frost Death Knight and Blood Death Knight took the nerfs a little bit more seriously. Unholy Death Knight, there has been some evolution of the list. We're seeing Posig also added to Unholy Death Knight. Unholy Death Knight is least dependent on discoveries out of all the 3 Death Knight archetypes, and that means that Unholy Death Knight, now that its main competitors Frost and Blood are a little bit weaker, Unholy Death Knight can shine. And interestingly enough, Unholy Death Knight only has 2 real counters on the ladder, and those counters are still Frost Death Knight and Blood Death Knight. Even though those decks lost more than Unholy, they are still very strong against Unholy, but they're weaker against the overall meta, which means that Unholy has a great chance to be the best deck in the game. So if you want the easiest climb right now, Unholy is unparalleled. There's nothing quite close to the level of power Unholy has, but then there's a whole bunch of viable decks that you can use to climb all the way to Legend, using pretty much any class. I suppose even Warrior with Menagerie could still do it, although statistics are not too kind for that one. And yeah, that's the current meta, very diverse meta. We don't see a lot of effects of the buffs, we also don't see a ton of stuff from Festival of Legends, but I expect more balance changes to be coming, and we'll see how those will affect things. At the moment, maybe the archetypes are a bit old, but the overall meta is very diverse and you can play pretty much any class you like. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.